Edit people assumed the CEO was the single dad's partner. She never denied it. Why did people believe the CEO was the single dad's partner? What made her choose not to deny it? Hello everyone, and welcome to our channel. We are happy to have you here today. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories. Thank you for joining us and supporting this journey. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you think if people made assumptions about a connection like this? Now, let us begin this unforgettable story and discover the moment that changed everything. Stay with us as the first chapter of this emotional journey begins with a surprising moment. Edit. You have no idea who is standing in front of you. The stranger whispered, but Daniel Brooks only smiled and handed her the keys. Everyone deserves help, no matter their name. The small garage on the edge of Cedar Falls was usually quiet on Monday mornings. The sound of tools, the smell of motor oil, and the old radio playing softly in the corner were all familiar parts of Daniel's simple life. At 39 years old, Daniel was a single father who had learned to find meaning in small things. He fixed cars, packed lunches for his daughter Lily, and showed up every day because someone depended on him. That morning, a woman in an expensive black coat walked into his garage carrying a problem she could not solve alone. She looked out of place among the worn workbenches and dusty shelves, but Daniel did not ask questions about her appearance or the luxury car parked outside. He only asked, "What seems to be the problem?" The woman looked surprised. Most people recognized her before they ever spoke to her. They knew the company name. They knew the headlines. They knew the success. But Daniel only saw someone who needed assistance. "You are not going to ask who I am?" she asked. Daniel tightened a loose bolt and looked up calmly. "Should I?" For the first time that day, Madison Reed did not know how to respond. She was used to rooms changing when she entered them. She was used to people choosing their words carefully around her. As the CEO of one of Chicago's fastest-growing technology companies, Madison had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from her. But this man did not seem impressed, intimidated, or curious about her status. He simply wanted to fix the problem. Daniel noticed the hesitation in her eyes but said nothing. He returned to his work, giving her the space to feel comfortable. It was a small gesture, but Madison noticed. "How much do I owe you?" she asked when the repair was finished. Daniel gave her a fair price. No extra charge. No attempt to impress her. Madison reached for her wallet, then paused. "You really do not know who I am, do you?" Daniel smiled slightly. "You are Madison. You came in with a car problem. That is enough for me." Those words stayed with her longer than she expected. Later that afternoon, Daniel returned home to Lily, unaware that the woman from his garage was not just another customer. He did not know that Madison Reed was someone thousands of people followed, someone whose decisions could change entire companies. All he knew was that a person needed help and he had helped. But the next morning, when Madison returned to the garage, Daniel realized something was different. She was not there because of her car. She was there because of him. And before he could ask why, someone nearby recognized her and said the words that would change how everyone looked at Daniel forever. "I came back because I wanted to know why you treated me like I was just another person," Madison said quietly. Daniel looked up from the engine he was repairing and smiled. "Because you are." Those simple words were the reason Madison Reed returned to the small garage on the edge of Cedar Falls the following morning. Not because of her car. Not because she needed another repair. Something about Daniel Brooks had stayed in her mind long after she left. In a world where people often changed their attitude the moment they learned her name, Daniel had remained exactly the same. The garage was still filled with the same sounds from the day before. The old radio played softly. Tools rested on the wooden workbench. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. Daniel moved through the space like he always did, focused on his work and unaware that the woman standing near the entrance was someone most people would recognize immediately. "You really came back," Daniel said. Madison nodded. "I did." She looked around the garage. "I wanted to thank you." Daniel wiped his hands with a cloth and shrugged. "You already paid me." Madison smiled slightly. "That is not what I meant." Daniel did not push for an explanation. He simply returned to his work, and somehow that made Madison feel even more comfortable. She spent years in meetings where every word had a purpose and every conversation had an agenda. But here there was no pressure, no expectation, just a quiet moment with someone who did not need anything from her. Over the next few weeks, Madison found small reasons to stop by. Sometimes she brought her car for minor checks. Sometimes she simply asked Daniel for advice about ordinary things. Daniel never asked about her company or her wealth. He talked about everyday life, his daughter Lily, and the importance of doing what was right even when nobody noticed. One afternoon, Lily walked into the garage after school, carrying her backpack and a drawing in her hand. "Dad, I made something for you," she said. Daniel smiled and looked at the picture. It was a simple drawing of the garage with 3 people standing outside. Madison noticed the drawing and laughed softly. "I guess I made it into the picture." Lily looked up at her. "You help my dad smile more." The words were innocent, but Madison became quiet for a moment. She looked at Daniel and he quickly looked away, pretending to focus on a toolbox. It was a small moment, but it meant something. Meanwhile, people around Cedar Falls began noticing the unusual friendship forming between the humble mechanic and the successful CEO. They saw Madison's expensive car outside Daniel's small garage. They saw the way she listened when he spoke. They saw how comfortable she seemed around him. And slowly, people began creating their own stories. One evening, Daniel stopped by a local diner with Lily after closing the garage. A customer at the counter recognized Madison from a business magazine. Sitting nearby, the man looked at Daniel, then at the picture of Madison on the cover. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Wait a second," he said. "Is that the woman who keeps coming to your garage?" Daniel looked confused. "Yes." "Why?" The man smiled and lowered his voice. "Because that is Madison Reed. She is the CEO everyone in Chicago knows." Daniel stared for a moment, realizing the woman he had treated like anyone else was someone the entire city watched. But before he could process it, another question appeared. If Madison was so powerful, why did she keep coming back to a small garage owned by a single father? "So you are telling me the woman everyone sees on magazine covers has been spending time at your garage?" Daniel's neighbor asked, still unable to hide his surprise. Daniel looked down at his coffee and shook his head. "She is just Madison." But the town of Cedar Falls did not see her that way anymore. After people discovered Madison Reed was the CEO of Reed Technologies, the small garage that Daniel Brooks owned suddenly became the place everyone was talking about. The same people who had walked past Daniel for years now looked twice. They wondered why someone like Madison would keep visiting a man who lived such a simple life. Daniel noticed the whispers, but he tried not to let them bother him. His life had always been quiet. He had never wanted attention. He only wanted to provide for Lily and keep his small business running. But Madison's presence had changed something. Not because she brought wealth or influence, but because people were starting to look at Daniel differently. One afternoon, Daniel was fixing a truck outside the garage when a customer named Robert walked over with a curious expression. "You know, most people would be acting very differently if someone like her was interested in knowing them," Robert said. Daniel looked confused. "Interested in knowing me? She is just a person who needed help." Robert smiled. "That is exactly why she keeps coming back." Daniel did not answer. He looked through the garage window and saw Madison sitting with Lily, helping her with homework while waiting for her car to be checked. The sight felt unusual but also strangely natural. Madison had built a world where everyone wanted something from her. Daniel had built a world where people mattered more than appearances. Somewhere between those two worlds, something unexpected was happening. But not everyone viewed it kindly. In the following days, some people began making assumptions. They saw Madison arriving at the garage. They saw her laughing with Daniel and his daughter. They saw a successful CEO spending time with a single father who owned a small business. Soon, the questions started. "Are they together?" someone asked at a local coffee shop. "Maybe she is helping him because she sees potential," another person replied. Daniel heard some of these comments, and they made him uncomfortable. He did not want anyone thinking he was using Madison's position to gain something. That evening, after Lily went to bed, Daniel sat alone in the garage, looking at the tools he had used for years. He had spent his whole life earning everything with his own hands. The idea that people might think differently bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The next morning, Madison arrived and immediately noticed something was different. Daniel was quieter than usual. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked softly. Daniel looked at her for a moment before answering. "People are talking." Madison stayed silent. She understood exactly what he meant. She had spent years dealing with rumors, assumptions, and people creating stories about her life. But this time it was different. This time, the person being judged was someone who never asked for attention. "Why do you let them think whatever they want?" Daniel asked. Madison looked toward the garage door, where sunlight entered through the open space. She paused before answering. "Because for once, they are seeing someone who does not care about my title." Daniel studied her expression, realizing there was a reason she never corrected anyone. A reason she had not shared yet. And before he could ask another question, Madison received a phone call that made her expression completely change. "Because for once, they are seeing someone who does not care about my title." Madison's words stayed in Daniel's mind long after she left the garage. He had expected an explanation. Instead, he received an answer that created even more questions. The next morning, the garage felt different. The same tools hung on the same walls. The same morning light came through the windows. But Daniel could feel that something had changed between them. Madison arrived earlier than usual, holding 2 cups of coffee. She placed one on his workbench and looked around quietly. "You always come here before everyone else," she said. Daniel smiled. "Someone has to open the place." Madison looked at the old garage, the worn chairs, and the small details that showed years of hard work. "You built all of this yourself?" Daniel nodded. "Piece by piece." There was something about that answer that made Madison pause. She understood building something. She had built a company from the ground up. But Daniel had built something different. A life. A place where people trusted him. A home where his daughter felt safe. "Daniel," Madison said softly, "do you ever wonder why I keep coming back?" He looked at her. "I assumed it was because your car has problems." Madison smiled, but her expression quickly became more serious. "That is not why." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the old radio filled the silence. Daniel noticed the hesitation in her eyes. It was the first time he saw that the confident CEO from the magazines was not always certain. There was another side of her that most people never saw. "When people learn who I am, they change," Madison said. "They become careful. They try to impress me. They want something." She looked down at her coffee cup. "You did not do any of that." Daniel leaned against the workbench. "I do not know what you expected me to do." Madison gave a small laugh. "That is exactly the point." But Daniel still had one question. "Why did you let people keep talking?" Madison became quiet. She looked toward the open garage door where the morning traffic passed by. "Because they were wrong about one thing." Daniel waited. "What thing?" Madison looked back at him. "They think I am here because of what you can get from me." She paused. "They do not realize I am here because of what I saw in you." Daniel did not know how to respond. He was not used to compliments, especially from someone like Madison. Before he could answer, Lily walked into the garage carrying her backpack. "Dad, are you coming home early today?" she asked. Daniel turned toward his daughter and smiled. "I will try." Madison watched the two of them, and something in her expression softened. She saw the patience Daniel had with Lily, the way he listened, the way he made his daughter feel important. It reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, a moment from years ago, a moment involving a young woman who had been struggling, a broken car, and a stranger who helped without asking for anything in return. Madison looked at Daniel's old toolbox sitting near the wall. On the side was a small faded sticker she had not noticed before. Her eyes widened slightly. She knew that sticker. She remembered that day. Daniel noticed her reaction. Madison? Are you okay? She looked at him, but this time there was something different in her eyes. Surprise, recognition, and a memory she had kept hidden for years. Daniel, she whispered. Have we met before? Yes, Madison whispered, staring at the faded sticker on Daniel's old toolbox. I remember this. Daniel looked at her carefully, trying to understand why a small sticker on a worn toolbox could change the entire mood of the garage. What do you mean you remember it? He asked. Madison ran her fingers lightly over the edge of the toolbox, lost in a memory that had stayed with her for years. About 8 years ago, before I became the CEO everyone knows today, I was just someone trying to figure out what my next step was. Daniel listened quietly. Madison looked toward the garage floor, almost as if she was seeing a different place. My car broke down on a rainy afternoon. I was stressed, frustrated, and honestly embarrassed because I did not know what to do. Daniel's expression softened. He had helped many people over the years, and most moments blended together. But Madison remembered every detail. A man came out, fixed the problem, and refused to take extra money from me when I tried to thank him. Daniel looked surprised. That was you. Madison nodded. You told me something that day. She smiled slightly. You said, a bad day does not make someone a bad person. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. The garage became quiet. Daniel looked away for a moment, trying to remember. It was possible. He had said things like that many times. He had simply never thought those words would stay with someone. I was going through one of the hardest moments of my life, Madison continued. Nobody knew my name. Nobody cared who I was going to become. But you helped me without knowing anything about me. Daniel leaned against the workbench. Madison, I was just doing my job. She shook her head gently. No, you were doing more than that. You reminded me that success was not the only thing that mattered. For the first time, Daniel understood why she had returned. It was not curiosity. It was not because she wanted something from him. It was because she remembered a moment he had forgotten. Later that day, Madison sat with Daniel and Lily outside the garage during lunch. She watched Daniel laugh with his daughter and realized something important. The man people overlooked had spent years creating the kind of impact that money could never buy. But Daniel still struggled to accept that idea. You make it sound like I did something extraordinary, he said. Madison looked at him. Maybe you did not notice because you were too busy being kind. Daniel smiled quietly, but he did not fully believe her. He had spent years seeing himself as an ordinary man trying to get through each day. Meanwhile, Madison had spent years remembering one ordinary act that changed how she saw the world. But their conversation was not the only thing changing. As word spread about Madison's connection with Daniel, more people began asking questions. Some were curious. Some were supportive. Others wondered why someone as successful as Madison would spend so much time at a small garage. Daniel noticed the attention growing, and it made him uncomfortable. He had never wanted to be part of a story. He only wanted to live his life quietly. That evening, Madison received an invitation to a major company event in Chicago. She looked at the message, then looked toward Daniel's garage one last time before leaving. She knew bringing Daniel into her world could change everything. But she also knew there was something he deserved to hear. Because the next time people judged him, she wanted them to know the truth about the man they had never taken the time to see. Daniel, I want you to come with me, Madison said as she stood inside the small garage, holding the invitation in her hand. Daniel looked at her with surprise. Come where? Madison took a slow breath. To Chicago, to the company event. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. The sound of the old garage fan filled the silence between them. He looked around at the place he had built over the years. The workbench, the tools, the walls filled with memories. This was his world. Simple, familiar, safe. Madison, I do not think that is a good idea, Daniel finally said. Her expression changed slightly. Why? Daniel lowered his eyes. Because your world and mine are different. Madison stepped closer. Different does not mean one is better than the other. But Daniel knew what people would see. They would not see the man who worked every day to provide for his daughter. They would see a single father standing next to a powerful CEO and make their own assumptions. A few days later, Daniel found himself walking through the glass doors of Madison's company headquarters in downtown Chicago. The building was everything he expected. Tall, modern, filled with people moving quickly from one meeting to another. Daniel adjusted the collar of his jacket and looked around quietly. He was not uncomfortable because the building was impressive. He was uncomfortable because he felt like everyone noticed he did not belong. Madison noticed immediately. "You are thinking about leaving," she said. Daniel looked at her and gave a small smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I know the feeling." Daniel looked surprised. "You?" Madison nodded. "More often than people think." Before Daniel could respond, they entered the main conference room. Several executives turned toward them. Some greeted Madison warmly. Others looked at Daniel with curiosity. One man glanced at Daniel's simple jacket and then at Madison. "Madison, is this the person everyone has been talking about?" he asked. The room became quiet. Daniel felt the attention shift toward him. Madison looked at the man calmly. "This is Daniel Brooks." The executive smiled politely. "Right? The garage owner." The words were not insulting, but the meaning behind them was clear. Daniel noticed. Madison noticed too. Before she could speak, Daniel stepped forward. "It is nice to meet you," he said. "I know this is not my usual environment, but I appreciate being invited." His calm response surprised people more than any impressive introduction could have. He did not try to prove himself. He did not defend his life. He simply stood there with the same dignity he had shown in his garage. Later that evening, Madison walked with Daniel through the quiet hallway after the event ended. "I am sorry," she said. Daniel looked at her. "For what?" "For making you feel like you had to prove you belonged." Daniel shook his head. "Madison, I have spent years knowing who I am. Other people's opinions do not change that." She stopped walking and looked at him. It was the same confidence she had noticed from the first day they met. Quiet, steady, real. But outside the building, cameras and reporters had already noticed something unexpected. The CEO of Reed Technologies had arrived at the event with a single father from a small garage in Cedar Falls. By the next morning, the picture was everywhere. And when Daniel saw the headline on his phone, he realized the entire city had created a story about him before they ever knew the truth. They were not looking at Daniel Brooks anymore. They were looking at a story they created about him. The morning after the company event, Daniel sat in his small kitchen with a cup of coffee while his phone continued receiving messages. Some people from Cedar Falls were curious. Others had already formed opinions. He placed the phone face down and looked across the table at Lily. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked. Daniel smiled gently. "Yeah, just a lot of people talking about things they do not really understand." Lily tilted her head. "Does that bother you?" Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes, but I cannot control what people say. I can only control who I choose to be." Those words were simple, but they stayed with Madison when Daniel repeated them later that day. She had invited him to a community event hosted by her company, one focused on supporting local small businesses. She knew some people would question why he was there. She also knew they needed to see something they had missed. The event was held in a large hall outside Chicago. Business leaders, community members, and local entrepreneurs gathered to share their stories. Daniel stood quietly near the back, listening more than speaking. He did not come expecting attention. He came because Madison told him his experience mattered. During the event, one of the organizers announced that several small business owners would share what their communities meant to them. When Daniel's name appeared on the screen, he looked surprised. He turned toward Madison. "You did not tell me about this." Madison smiled. "Because you would have found a reason not to do it." Daniel shook his head slightly. "You know me too well." When he walked onto the stage, the room became quiet. Many people there knew Madison. Many knew her company. But most of them did not know Daniel. They only knew the image they had seen online. A single father. A small garage owner. someone they assumed had somehow entered a world that was not his. Daniel looked across the room and took a slow breath. "I am not used to speaking in rooms like this," he began. A few people smiled. "Most days, I am covered in oil, fixing engines, and trying to make sure I get home before my daughter finishes her homework." The room relaxed. Daniel continued. "For a long time, I thought success meant reaching a place where people finally noticed you. But I learned something different. The most important work we do is often the work nobody sees." Madison watched from the side of the room. She saw people listening differently now. Daniel was not trying to impress anyone. He was simply telling the truth. "A business is not just about numbers," Daniel said. "A community is not just about names people recognize. It is about people showing up for each other when there is nothing to gain." When he finished, the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Not because they did not know what to say, because they were thinking. Then the applause began. Madison smiled, but she also noticed something else. A man near the front who had previously looked uncertain about Daniel was now standing and clapping. After the event, Daniel stepped outside into the evening air. "That was unexpected," he said. Madison smiled. "You mean people finally listened?" Daniel looked back at the building. "No. I mean they finally saw something I was never trying to show them." But just as they prepared to leave, Madison received a message that changed her expression. Someone had discovered another piece of Daniel's past. A piece that could reveal just how many lives he had quietly changed without ever telling anyone. The truth was never hidden because Daniel wanted attention. It was hidden because he never believed it was important. The message Madison received after the event came from a woman named Karen Mitchell, a community organizer from Cedar Falls. She had seen Daniel's speech and wanted to share something that had happened years earlier. Madison read the message twice before looking up at Daniel. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated. Daniel noticed the change in her expression immediately. "Madison, what happened?" She handed him the phone. The message was simple. Karen explained that years ago, when her small family business was struggling, Daniel had quietly helped them keep their doors open. He had repaired their equipment, offered advice, and refused payment when he knew they were going through a difficult time. Daniel stared at the screen. "I remember helping them," he said softly, "but I did not know it meant that much." Madison looked at him. "That is the difference between you and most people. You remember the action. They remember the person behind it." Over the next few days, more stories began appearing. Not because Daniel searched for recognition, but because people who had crossed paths with him finally had a reason to speak. A local teacher shared how Daniel fixed her car before an important school event and told her not to worry about paying until she was ready. A neighbor remembered how Daniel helped repair a broken bicycle for a child in the community. None of these moments were dramatic. None of them made headlines at the time. They were small acts that disappeared into ordinary days. But now, one by one, they were returning. Daniel felt uncomfortable watching people praise him. One evening, he stood inside his garage after closing time, looking at the empty space around him. Madison found him there. "You are avoiding everyone," she said gently. Daniel smiled. "I am working." Madison looked around. "No, you are hiding." Daniel became quiet. She stepped closer. "Why is it so hard for you to accept that people appreciate you?" He looked at the old tools on the wall. "Because I never did those things to become important." Madison nodded slowly. "I know. That is why they matter." For a moment, Daniel had no answer. He had spent years believing kindness was simply something people should do. He never imagined that the same kindness would one day come back to him. But while Daniel was learning to accept recognition, another challenge was approaching. The attention surrounding him and Madison continued to grow. Some people admired their connection. Others questioned it. A few wondered if Daniel was benefiting from Madison's success. Those comments reached Daniel, and they affected him more than he wanted to admit. He worried that people would think every opportunity he received came from Madison instead of his own actions. When Madison noticed him becoming distant, she asked him directly, "Are you pulling away because of what people are saying?" Daniel looked at her and remained silent for a moment. I do not want anyone thinking I became someone because of you. Madison's expression softened. Daniel, you were already someone before anyone knew my name. Those words stayed with him. But before he could respond, Madison received another invitation. This time it was not for a company event. It was a public announcement that would put Daniel in front of an even larger audience. And Madison knew that once the world heard his story, there would be no going back to the quiet life he once knew. The room was filled with people who had once only seen Daniel Brooks as a simple mechanic from a small town. But on that evening, they were finally seeing the person behind the quiet actions. Daniel stood near the stage, looking out at the crowd gathered for the community recognition event. He still felt uncomfortable with the attention. He had spent his entire life helping people without expecting anything in return. Recognition had never been the goal. Madison stood nearby and noticed the familiar hesitation in his eyes. You know you can still walk away, she said softly. Daniel smiled. You know I probably thought about it. Madison laughed quietly. I knew it. For a moment they stood in silence. Then Daniel looked toward the audience and took a deep breath. When he stepped forward, the room became quiet. I want to start by saying something simple, Daniel said. I am not here because I think I did anything extraordinary. Some people exchanged surprised looks. They expected a speech about success or achievement. Instead, Daniel talked about ordinary moments. Helping a neighbor, fixing something for someone who needed time, being there when someone had nowhere else to turn. Most of us will never know how much a small act matters to someone else, he said. Sometimes, the things we forget are the things other people remember forever. Madison watched the audience carefully. She saw people who once questioned Daniel now listening with respect. She saw people understanding that his value was never connected to money, status, or the person standing beside him. After the speech, the applause lasted longer than anyone expected. Among the crowd was a business owner who had once questioned Daniel's place at Madison's event. He approached him afterward and paused before speaking. I owe you an apology, he said. Daniel looked surprised. For what? The man smiled slightly. For deciding who you were before I ever took the time to know you. Daniel nodded. A lot of people do that. The man looked around the room. Not anymore. Later that evening, Daniel and Madison walked outside beneath the city lights. The noise from the event slowly faded behind them. You finally let people see you, Madison said. Daniel looked at her. I think they saw me because you gave them the chance. Madison shook her head. No, I only opened the door. You were the one who walked through it. Daniel smiled, but there was something different about him now. He was still the same father, the same mechanic, the same man who arrived early at his garage every morning. The difference was that he no longer believed being ordinary meant being invisible. Over the following months, life returned to a calmer rhythm. Daniel continued running his garage. Lily continued bringing her drawings to work. Madison continued leading her company. But their worlds were no longer separate. They had found a way to respect each other without either person needing to become someone else. People in Cedar Falls eventually stopped asking why a CEO spent time with a single dad. They stopped focusing on titles and assumptions. They started seeing the friendship, trust, and respect that had been there all along. One afternoon, Madison visited the garage again. She looked around at the same old tools and familiar walls. You know, she said, this place has not changed. Daniel smiled. Should it? Madison looked at him and shook her head. No, that is probably why it mattered. Daniel looked around the garage that had witnessed years of quiet kindness. He realized something important. The greatest moments of his life were never the ones where the world finally noticed him. They were the moments when he chose to do the right thing, even when nobody was watching. And in the end, the world did not change Daniel into someone worthy of respect. It simply learned to recognize the worth that had been there from the beginning.